This was the first year I didn't get to climb into the 14.
You didn't climb into a 14?
No, but you were hanging out in one.
So wanted to sit down with Greg Hughes and have our annual Oshkosh interview with Greg Hughes. And we decided to do it sitting in the 14. Why? Because it was the end of the week. It was in shade because the canopy gave us shade, and we got to sit down. But talked to Greg Hughes specifically about building an airplane doesn't teach you how to fly it. So what's the proper way to get some transition training so that when you begin flying your airplane, whether you're doing the first test flight or not, that you know what to expect out of this airplane. At the end of the day, we want to fly safely, and the numbers don't lie. Get in transition training, get in familiar with the type before you hop in it and fly it. Makes you a safer pilot in that airplane. So let's see what Greg Hughes has to say about learning to fly your specific RV model. So Greg, another year, Oshkosh 23.
2023.
It's amazing. It's like a year ago, we really didn't know what we're doing. Now we just know we really don't know what we're doing. But we're building away. And
when did you get your first kit?
First rivet was April of 2022.
Okay.
So
yeah, so you're just a little over a year into it.
Yep. We did get the big join done right on our 1 year anniversary, which was something we worked towards.
That's quite a moment when it really comes together. You get all those parts are kind of airplane-ish looking when you do that, and it's like, oh my gosh, look at that thing.
We call it the moment the garage gets really small.
Yeah.
So, but away we go. So now as we get closer, we've got our finish kit coming. And again, you know, we've talked a lot about the supply chain and the lead times and things. Lead times are coming down in general.
No, in general, the supply chain is improved. There's still a few items that are sourced that are really available for a lot of different companies worldwide for like one supplier, right? And they make it's a very specialty item kind of thing. And even those are improving, but there's still some room for improvement. But you know, we work really closely with those particular manufacturers and sourcing vendors to try to be able to plan so that we can get stuff. We push and push and push and push to get whatever we can as soon as we can, and it's better. It's not perfect yet in some cases, but it's definitely better.
I mean, it's still a complex environment. It's
it is. You know, you've had with the inflationary situation, economic inflation. That's been hard hitting on people that are doing supply chain as well. You know, from the raw material manufacturers all the way through to somebody that builds a specialty component or us that resells it in a finished kit. And you know, and it's a domino effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's definitely improving, so that's good.
So now we're really turning our attention to eventually we're going to be flying this airplane, right. And we figure we've got upwards of 1,200 hours into the build. To be honest, we're behind on our builder's log, so we don't know how many hours we put in.
That's all right.
But I've got 0.7 hours of Van's aircraft as a whole. It happens to be an RV-14A that I got to fly.
Okay.
The owner was kind enough to sit me down, give me the checklist and say, take me for a flight.
Right.
So I found it to be incredibly intuitive for me with my experience, 1,500 hours of flight time, having flown all kinds of different airplanes. A very intuitive airplane to fly.
It's real small, nice, natural feeling controls, and very well harmonized. A lot of airplanes are fun to fly, but they're a little more challenging to fly because the feel of the controls is maybe just not quite there, and or the feel of the controls relative to the other controls. So on the stick, for example, you know, having a harmonized feel between the elevator and the ailerons, right, and roll and pitch, and even just with your feet. When the pressures feel right relative to each other, when the movement distances feel right relative to each other, it can make a real difference in terms of what it feels like to fly the airplane.
So I'm just like daydreaming about us flying our airplane now.
Yeah.
So what are some ways that Van's builders who are faced with, they're eventually going to have to do their first flight, what are some opportunities for them to get some experience, some transition training? Because me just hopping in saying, I got this, seems like the wrong plan.
I would say it seems like the wrong plan. I would say it is the wrong plan.
Yes.
So the first thing is you don't have to do your first flight. So people need to realize that. The first flight of the airplane for somebody who does not, certainly for somebody who hasn't had the transition training and hasn't become comfortable and familiar with the airplane that you're going to fly, there's a lot of risk associated with the first flight of a brand new airplane, especially an amateur-built airplane. Right? There are thousands of things that can be missed. There's thousands of things that have to not be missed and have to be ready to go. So the first thing is you need to understand it is not mandatory that you do the first flight of your airplane. And if ego is driving somebody who shouldn't be doing their first flight to do that first flight anyway, then that person needs to start doing some pretty serious thinking about hazardous attitudes and I'm safe checklists and all that kind of stuff, probably on a daily basis anyway. So I would encourage people to really consider that. Are you the right person to do your first flight? That said, you've got 1,500 plus hours of flight time.
Yep.
If you were to do formal transition training with an actual really good transition trainer that has a set curriculum that really knows what they're doing and can actually truly evaluate you in terms of your ability to operate the airplane, and also in the context of conducting the first flight, then that's an invaluable thing. And it's something, we have transition trainers that have gone through Mike Seeger is our primary transition trainer and flight instructor. He's out of Vernonia, Oregon. He uses our factory airplanes to do that transition training. He's got more than 25,000 hours of RV time. Right?
So a little
Almost
bit of experience.
All of that, just a little bit. I mean, he's by far, in the whole world, by far the highest time RV pilot. In fact, I think in the whole universe, he's the highest time RV pilot.
He's the top.
Yeah, he's it. And he is also the person who checks out. And so on the Vans Aircraft website, there's a list of CFIs who Vans has listed and approved, if you will, to conduct transition training. So what that means is that those CFIs have flown along with Mike and have gone through an evaluation and have learned the curriculum and the standard way that we use to teach people to transition in a way that transitions them for the airplane that they're going to be flying, that they're going to learn to fly. And the numbers are clearly support the fact that doing the transition training substantially increases safety.
Yes.
And we are a pretty strong and opinionated company when it comes to things that affect safety.
Yes.
And so what we have seen is that doing transition training as part of the preparation just to be able to fly the airplane in general is really, really valuable. And of course, that also means that it's incredibly valuable if somebody is going to be doing the first flight in their airplane. Now, if somebody is a 100-hour pilot or a 200-hour pilot and they're just going to go and jump into the airplane and think they're just going to be able to fly it, I think they need to start thinking about the way they think about flying, and that's not about the airplane, that's more about them.
About the attitude, especially if your entire experience is in a 172 or a Piper Warrior. Now you're adding high performance, first flight, experimental build. You're adding to that list of things that you need to worry about.
Right. And when you go and you do the first flight of the airplane, I mean, you have temperatures, you have engines that have not flown before, you got a propeller on there, you have a ton of mechanical systems and a ton of software systems that may or may not be hooked up right. I mean, you hear stories every now and then of somebody who takes off and their autopilot trim is, they didn't check it and it's backwards. And pitch up actually goes pitch down and vice versa. They go and they hit the autopilot and the autopilot's fighting them.
Are there any
you need to be familiar with the airplane.
Yes.
So when you get into a situation, so that when something isn't working quite the way it's supposed to, or God forbid you should have a serious engine problem on a first flight or a second flight, that you're in an airplane that you can understand and command, and that you have really full authority of when something goes wrong.
Exactly.
It's just like aerobatics, right? We don't worry about +6 and -3 G's in aerobatics because the maneuver is done right, because they're not done to +6 and -3. We worry about +6 and -3 for somebody who botches the maneuver and doesn't know how to get out of it. And so that's why aerobatic training is really important. So along the same lines, transition training can teach you to do things and make you a better pilot, and also prepare you for doing something that you've never done before.
So let's go back to that transition training. What does that typically look like? Does it vary based upon experience? Like someone with that 100-hour pilot we're talking about earlier, their transition training might look slightly different than mine.
Yeah, so I know the way Mike approaches it is it's on a case-by-case basis. Generally speaking, he's going to spend half of 4 days flying with somebody, half of 4 or 5 days during a week flying with somebody, and that's about usually what it takes. There are people who go and fly with Mike, and they spend that week with Mike, doing the ground and the flight, and he tells them you're not quite ready yet. Yeah. And he has no qualms in telling people that, which is good, right? And so they'll go home, and he'll give them an idea of, go and practice these things in your airplane, whether they have a Cessna or a Piper or whatever they're flying, and then come back and we'll finish you up. And most people take him up on that when he says you're not quite ready.
Sure.
And that but that's the deal. I mean, you want to be evaluated, not you're not just checking a box, right? You want to make sure that you're getting what you need and that you really actually are prepared. Yeah. So it's not about insurance companies saying you have to have 5 hours of transition training. There is that, and that's necessary for the insurance company, but that shouldn't be your purpose in going into transition training.
It's safely operating this airplane and learning something that's new to a lot of us if you haven't been in the vans community. Right. My short experience so far, I mean, it flies very intuitively. It's very user friendly. It made a lot of sense to me. Right. But there's quirks. There's things unique to every airplane. Just like when I hopped in the Bonanza for the first time, it
sure.
took me some time to understand how to fly that airplane correctly.
Especially if it's a VTAL.
Yep, and I've done both V-tails and straight tails, and added turbocharger into it at one point.
And it becomes more and more complex. And if you've flown a 172 with round gauges and you jump into an RV-14, with electronic EFIS, electronic flaps, and a bunch of other controls, and it's just not what you're used to. You're transitioning into a whole bunch of new stuff. You're getting to know that. And the other thing to remember is you shouldn't be in a hurry to do your first flight. You should be just the opposite, right? You should be saying, I'm just going to assume that I'm not ready.
Yep.
And that it's not time yet. And take your time. There's nothing that says you have to do your first flight within a certain amount of time after getting the airworthiness certificate.
Correct.
It should be about convincing yourself that you're not ready until you can't convince yourself of that anymore, because all the evidence proves otherwise.
Yeah.
There is also the additional pilot program that's been around for a few years now that people can choose to take advantage of. So when you get your airworthiness certificate and the operating limitations, you can choose to request additional pilot program where you can have a pilot that has to go through and meet a large list of experience requirements related to hours of flight and type of flight, familiarity with the airplane that's being flown, things like that, where you can have somebody else with you during phase one. And there's a lot of debate, in the forums and online, and just differing opinions about, having two people in the airplane is never safer. Other people say it's always safer. And again, it's a tool that you can evaluate and choose to potentially use if you want to. But it's another way of allowing somebody who has built their airplane to maybe be involved in the first flight and in the phase one flying, where they might not be involved otherwise, because you can have a really experienced deep experienced pilot that can assist in the process of doing that. Is there additional risk in doing that? Sure, because there's two people in the airplane. Is there additional risk in just jumping in and going and flying the airplane for the first time? Sure there is, because there's nobody else there to help.
Yeah, exactly.
And because you don't know what you don't know. So
you get away.
Transition training in the prep is all about trying to understand, what do I not know? How do I know what I don't know? And how do I address that before I get myself into trouble?
So what are some first flight profiles? Like how is it typically a quick lap around the pattern the first time, or is there some specific things that you actually want to engage the first time? Because I know you're balancing breaking in the engine with safety, obviously, and there's got to be a push and pull there.
So most first flights are conducted over the airport at an altitude that's appropriate to allow recovery if you were to have an engine problem, for example, or any one of a variety of other problems, to be able to basically glide to the airport. That's one thing. There's the EAA. We're here at AirVenture, right? The EAA has a really, really good test flight program. That's a book that describes it, and also basically the test cards. So a book of test cards, which I would highly encourage you to use and leverage, because they cover, and they have test cards for first flight and second flight and evaluating all the different systems. But you want to make sure things are working right, and breaking in the engine is part of keeping things working right. So you're going to have to run it at high power and high temperatures for a while until the temperatures come down and it breaks in. And there's nothing, and some people are afraid to do that. I don't want to run at high power. It's a brand new engine. You have to run at high power because it's a brand new engine. So, but the cards walk you through in a risk-managed way, step by step. What are the different things that you need to do? And takes you all the way through all the things, which some people don't ever actually finish, which is things like doing the time to climb, right? And finding out all the V speeds and finding out all of the performance numbers for a wide variety of different configurations of weight and balance and loading for your airplane, so that you can know that. So if you want to ride a POH, you could literally write yourself an operating handbook for the airplane that includes all the information. If you went through and do all the tests, you can do enough information to create your own charts, for your airplane, for that specific airplane in the different loadings. And there's a lot of value in doing that. But and the other thing about using the EAA's test cars and flight test program, is you're going to learn a lot about your airplane and also about your flying abilities in doing so. And there's a lot of sort of like built into refined flying that goes into doing the test flight cards that is a lot of fun, really. I mean, I love technical and really like precision specific flying. I imagine, knowing you and your personality, you probably do too. So I think that you would find that really fun and kind of exciting.
It's going to be a really fun phase of flying. Just go out there and really figure out, just every nook and corner of the, what your plane can and can't do, and what the numbers should be. And
do it safely.
Yes.
Right? Do it safely. I mean, you're married, you got a kid on the way.
Yep.
It's important that you get that airplane back on the ground after the first, second, third flights. In the first 10 or 12 hours of flight, just what the statistics show is that's when things happen.
Yep.
And usually not in the first flight.
No,
usually it happens sometime a little bit later.
Yeah.
So being prepared for that, and understanding that is really important.
It's being, I've had the fortune of doing a lot of test flying of being first to fly after we had engine overhauls, after we've had cylinder overhauls or changes or thing. The number one time that a plane is likely to fail is right after maintenance.
Right.
And you being spring-loaded to abort is the thing. It's like when you line up on the runway, you're convinced in your mind, I'm aborting this takeoff unless something proves to me otherwise.
And building an airplane and finishing it is the ultimate maintenance exercise.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like maintenance on top of maintenance on top of maintenance on steroids, right?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot. I know we're not fully educated on all the steps that we're going to be doing before we're ready for that first flight. We know it's a process. We know we're committed to it. We know that we're going to learn a lot as we get a lot closer.
Yep.
And it's really, it's like how many times can you check certain things? We do hear the horror stories about the trim hooked up backwards. And some really...
And literally everything is something you can catch on the ground.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? You really can.
And these are respected people who are, I think, did a great job in their build, and their trim was backwards.
No, it happens, but being prepared for that and paying attention to what other people's experiences are, and leveraging that in your pre-flight process, getting ready for the first flight is really valuable, and it's important to do. But I would say definitely, if do you already have a copy of the EA test flight?
We do not yet, but we're going to get it.
Well, wait, they have them here.
All right.
So we can go get one.
So I lied. The interview with you was not our last checkbox on Oshkosh. You just gave us another one to do.
There you go. See,
we're going to make that happen.
And when you read it, if you have questions, give me a call. If you,
Will do.
Because I'm more than happy to talk with you about it. I think we're going to do a little video on the EAA test.
Oh, cool.
Because we actually leverage some of the same stuff at Vans.
Okay.
Axel, our chief test pilot, for the company, was a test pilot. That did a whole bunch of test piloting stuff that was like super regimented for many, many years. And so he brings a level of experience to us that just proves to us again and again and again the value of being really, really clearly regimented in the way that you do things, and always staying that way, and making sure that you've got everything evaluated, and that you're taking the time to make sure that everything's on the table, and that you've addressed all the items.
And as far as the coverage of the authorized CFIs to do the transition training, how well coverage to the country do we have?
It's pretty good. We have folks in Illinois and back in Pennsylvania and around Philly, down in Texas and Florida, and of course in Oregon and all kinds of places in between. And if you want to go and find out who it is, just go to our website.
Perfect.
And it's on the website.
All right. So we'll be checking the website and figuring out who makes sense for us to do some training.
Yeah.
Part of it, after all this building, I just want to get in a 14 and do some flying again.
Remind me where you live?
Texas, Austin, Texas.
All right. Well, Alex down in Texas, a terrific person to go to for transition training.
Excellent.
He's awesome. If you want to fly a 14, then certainly Mike Seeger up in Oregon, or Zach, Joe Zacharowski, who's our East Coast rep and does transition training up near Philly. Okay. They both have RV-14s and 14As that they can use that they do transition training in every week.
Yep. So. Well. Sounds like a lot of fun. Greg, again, we really appreciate everything you do and everything the whole Vans family does.
No, likewise. I mean, I enjoy watching you guys doing your build on YouTube. The two of you are a lot of fun to watch. And, keep plugging away. You're going to be I can't wait. I can't wait for the day when I get to see the reaction to when you flew the airplane for the first time and you land and you're pulling up and shutting down the engine. And make sure you get video of that.
Yes.
Because the RV grin's a real thing.
It is.
And I get a little choked up every time I see somebody that's gone through that first experience, because I've done that before too. And, you know, it's a pretty special feeling. You know, it's you know, like, you know, if you own an airplane, you can go out and buy an airplane. Yeah. Right. And that's your airplane. But I always say when you put your heart and soul into it, you know, and then you go and you fly it and you bring it back and you shut down the engine and you open the cockpit, that's your airplane. Yep. And you know every nook and cranny and inch of that airplane, and it's a real special feeling. So it's quite a sense of accomplishment.